I was born in 1973, so the whole HIV/AIDS, I was a teenager that period. And that hung like a dark cloud over people who, started to have sex, and that was a dark cloud. This is my teenage years, and everybody from my generation and later. And what I realized, but I learned this earlier, that during the COVID, when we got to know more about Anthony Fauci, all of a sudden you see him appear, and you see in 1985, 86, he was there for the AIDS, basically with the same narrative, with the same playbook, and it started there, and it was the same scaremongering. I remember you could get AIDS and HIV from the toilet seat, and you were scared and frightened to death. The commercials they showed on TV were horrendous, just putting fear into people. And now I realize, thanks to your book, even to a deeper, and please get into that, Anthony Fauci started in 84, and before that, infectious diseases were sort of dealt with. It was not even a big, a big worry for people any longer. And then he came.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the issues, is that infectious disease, there was this dramatic drop in mortalities from infectious disease. The infectious disease didn't disappear. Measles essentially stopped killing anybody. It was killing, I think, 1 in a million kids during that. It used to kill 50,000 Americans a year back in the 1900s or the 1800s. And then by 1960, by my generation, it was considered a mild illness, self-limiting, that killed 1 in a million kids. It wasn't a serious, and the kids who were dying were vitamin A deficient. They were malnourished. This was when we still had malnutrition in our country. And, it's highly likely measles would kill nobody if they were getting vitamin A, which is what the WHO says. So there was an article, because the vaccine cartel tries to take credit for this decline, this huge drop, this momentous drop in deaths from infectious diseases. But CDC did a study in 2000. It's called GUYER, G-U-Y-E-R, and it was published in Pediatrics. And that study was with Johns Hopkins. They did it with a bunch of Johns Hopkins scientists, and they went through, 100 years of mortality and morbidity data. And what they were able to show is this huge decline had nothing to do with vaccines, literally nothing, and not even antibiotics. It all had to do with nutrition and better nutrition, less overcrowding, but hygiene, water purification, the chlorinated water, and sewage treatment plants. And these, it was the engineers who stopped disease, not the medical profession. That's what the GUYER study shows. But the vaccinologists took credit for it and said, we wiped out infectious disease. Now, by 1980, David Stockman, who was Ronald Reagan's budget director, was saying, we need to close down CDC to save money because infectious disease doesn't kill. It's not, it's like lightning. It kills so few people. So there was panic in the infectious disease bureaucracy in the United States saying, we need to find an infectious disease that
because if they closed that would stop the gravy train for all these big pharma companies and so many people profiting from it, huh? Wow.
Yeah, and the thing that I show in that in the book is that Tony Fauci did the same thing. He took one drug, which was AZT, which was horrendously toxic. It was deemed too toxic for chemotherapy. Now, with chemotherapy, you give the drug for 14 days, and the drug is going to kill you. And what the hope is, it will kill the tumor before it kills you, and they'll be able to kill the tumor and then pull it before it kills you. That's how chemotherapy, just simplistically, that's how it works. And AZT did kill the tumors, but it killed the humans just as fast. So they said, let's get rid of it. Now, they're only giving it for 2 weeks. Tony Fauci's idea is, look, we can show it kills HIV in a lab, in a petri dish. Therefore, it's a cure. And he doesn't look at what it's going to do to the people who take it. And he says to them, you take it for the rest of your life. 100% of those people are going to die, 100%.
Wow.
If they try to take it for life, they're going to die of it. But in order, he did the same thing in the safety trials. He gave the people who were getting AZT daily blood transfusions so that they would look like they were doing better. Because when you give a blood transfusion, you're taking the blood out with the AZT in it, and you're giving, you're making the people survive longer. So the people, and he was only able to keep them alive for a couple of months. But then he closed down the study and said it's so successful it would be unethical for us to continue to deny it to the placebo group. He gave it to the whole placebo group, kill them, and then he mandated it for everybody who had found HIV on a PCR test in you. And it's probable that most of the people who died from AIDS in the 80s and early 90s were actually dying of HIV. I mean, of AZT. And not only that, but there were many, many off-the-shelf drugs, repurposed drugs that were approved, but the pharmaceutical industry doesn't like those because they can't make any money on them. They're generics. That were showed devastatingly effective against the symptoms of AIDS.
So doesn't that story sound familiar?
That people could not get a hold of those drugs. That's why, if you ever see the show Dallas Buyers Club, there was all these buyers clubs in the United States at that time where people were going to Mexico, Canada, and Europe to get these drugs that were very effective against AIDS, but Tony Fauci wouldn't let them have it. And that's why those popped up. And then he did the same thing, of course, with the COVID vaccines. He killed ivermectin. He killed hydroxychloroquine. He made it so Americans couldn't get it. And he said the only thing that works against this is vaccines, which, of course, the vaccines don't work. And, you take 4 vaccines and then you get COVID 4 times. And so, it was the same play. And we lost so many people, Yaden, McCulloch, Peter McCulloch, Robert Malone, Harvey Rich, probably the greatest epidemiologists in our country from Yale, have all agreed that there was 750,000 Americans who died from COVID that should not have died if they had gotten early treatment. 85% of the people who died. And that's why the U.S. had the highest body count in the world. We have 4.2% of the world's population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. In our country, 3,000 Americans died out of every million population. Look at the countries that got ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Nigeria had a 1% vaccine rate, 1.3% vaccine rate. Everybody's on hydroxychloroquine because it has the highest malaria burden in the world. So everybody takes it once a week for malaria. And half the country is on ivermectin for river blindness because it has the highest river blindness burden. And their death was 14 people per million compared to 3,000 per million in the United States. 200 times what they had in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria has a much younger population, and COVID killed old people. So that is also a very potent covariable. But look at Japan, which is the oldest population in the world. They allowed their population to get ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and they had the same thing. They had 1/10 of the death rates that we had. Singapore, all the nations, these parallel states in India, some that adopted Fauci's protocols, and then the neighboring state like Uttar Pradesh, which didn't. And Uttar Pradesh ended the pandemic overnight by giving everybody ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine.
And also in your country, Robert, we shouldn't forget about the ventilators. Huh? Oh, sorry, we shouldn't forget about the ventilators.
Remdesivir and a ventilator, both of which will kill you.